Hello, dear readers. Welcome to The Mysterious Door in the Forest, a tale that will take you on an extraordinary journey through a world filled with hidden secrets, forgotten memories, and mystical realms. As you step into this story, prepare to follow Evelyn, a young woman whose curiosity leads her deep into the heart of an ancient forest, where a door, long thought to be a legend, waits to reveal its secrets. This is not just a tale of adventure, but one of self-discovery, where the past, present, and future intertwine. Will Evelyn uncover the truth about her parents' disappearance, or will the door prove to be more than she ever imagined? Without further delay, let's begin. The story starts at the edge of the forest, where the first steps toward the unknown are about to be taken. Chapter 1. The edge of the forest, the town of Greywood, had always been quiet, tucked away between the rolling hills and thick woods that seemed to go on forever. It wasn't a place that people came to for adventure or excitement. It was a place where life moved slowly, where the hustle and bustle of the outside world seemed like a distant dream. But for Evelyn, it was precisely this stillness that made the forest on the town's edge so compelling. As a child, Evelyn had been told countless stories about the forest, stories of shadowy creatures, hidden caves, and a mysterious door that no one had seen but everyone seemed to talk about. The adults whispered that the forest was cursed, a place best left undisturbed. But Evelyn had never been one to take such things at face value. She was different, curious, and the forest had always called to her. It wasn't until she discovered the map that her obsession grew into something more. It had been tucked away in an old trunk, hidden among the belongings of her late grandmother, the one person who had always encouraged her sense of wonder. The map was old, worn, and faded, with strange markings that Evelyn couldn't quite decipher. But there was one thing that stood out: a small, intricately drawn door, nestled deep within the heart of the forest. She had stared at that map for hours the night she found it, her fingers tracing the path that led to the door. It wasn't just a door, it was the door. The one her grandmother had mentioned in hushed tones when she thought Evelyn wasn't listening. It was a door that had captivated her imagination for years, and now it seemed like the door itself was calling her, beckoning her to uncover its secrets. That was why, 2 days later, Evelyn found herself standing at the very edge of the forest, a small pack slung over her shoulder, her heart pounding with excitement and a hint of fear. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the trees. The forest loomed before her, dark and dense, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for her to step inside. Her boots crunched against the dry leaves beneath her feet as she took her first step into the forest. The air felt different here, cooler, heavier, as if the very atmosphere had a life of its own. The trees, tall and ancient, stretched high above her, their branches weaving together like a tangled web, blocking out the sky. The sunlight filtered through the gaps, casting strange, dappled patterns on the forest floor. Evelyn paused for a moment, looking back at the town she had grown up in. It was still visible in the distance, but already it felt like another world. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, or what she would find, but she knew one thing: the forest held answers, and she wasn't going to stop until she found them. A few steps in, the sounds of the town faded away, replaced by the eerie silence of the woods. Even the wind seemed to whisper through the leaves, as if the forest was trying to communicate with her, or maybe it was warning her. She wasn't sure, but the thrill of discovery surged through her veins, overpowering any hesitation. Her eyes flicked over the map once more, tracing the winding path that led deeper into the forest. It wasn't long before the dense underbrush gave way to a narrow trail, barely visible beneath the overgrown ferns and moss-covered rocks. She took another step forward, her hand brushing against the rough bark of a nearby tree as she passed. The air smelled earthy, like rain-soaked soil and pine. As Evelyn walked, the forest seemed to shift. The path grew narrower, the trees closer together, their roots snaking across the ground like sleeping serpents. The deeper she went, the less familiar the surroundings became, as if the forest was slowly swallowing her whole, pulling her deeper into its secrets. Her mind raced with questions. Was the door real? Was it just a legend? Or was it something more? And what had happened to her parents all those years ago? No one had ever given her a straight answer, only cryptic stories about the forest and its strange power. She quickened her pace, the excitement bubbling inside her. Whatever answers the forest held, she was determined to find them. Chapter 2. The unseen watcher. The deeper Evelyn ventured into the forest, the more it seemed as though the world around her was holding its breath. The air grew thicker, the trees taller, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky. Every sound she made, her footsteps, the rustling of leaves, the soft breath escaping her lips, felt amplified in the stillness, as if the forest was listening, waiting. Evelyn's map, now crinkled and fragile in her hands, was her only guide. It seemed almost laughable, this old tattered thing that had been in her family for generations, but somehow it gave her a sense of direction, of purpose. She followed the winding path shown on the map, each step drawing her further away from the familiar and into the unknown. As she rounded a sharp bend in the trail, Evelyn felt a sudden chill brush against her skin. She paused, looking around. The wind had picked up, but it felt wrong. It wasn't the usual rustling breeze that played through the forest. This felt like something other. There was a stillness in the air now, a waiting kind of silence, and yet Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the unease that had settled in her chest. The forest was simply playing tricks on her, she told herself, but the sensation lingered. The path became increasingly treacherous as the terrain shifted from soft earth to jagged rocks and twisted roots. Evelyn had to step carefully, her boots slipping on the damp ground. The sunlight barely touched the forest floor now, hidden behind the thick canopy of leaves and branches. It was as though the sun itself hesitated to shine through. At some point, Evelyn stopped to rest, leaning against the trunk of a large oak. She wiped the sweat from her brow, her breath coming a little more quickly than she had expected. Despite her resolve, the weight of the forest was starting to press on her. Its oppressive silence, its deep shadows, and the mystery that hung in the air. Her eyes wandered over the map again, scanning the path that led to the door. There was something strange about the markings. At first, they had seemed like a simple drawing of the forest's paths. But now, under the dim light, she noticed faint symbols around the door, symbols she hadn't paid much attention to before. The shapes seemed to shimmer, like they were in constant flux, changing as her eyes moved over them. She frowned. What could they mean? Before she had time to contemplate further, a rustling noise broke through the silence. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as she instinctively stood up straighter, her eyes scanning the underbrush. At first, she thought it was just a squirrel or a bird, but the noise grew louder. Something, or someone, was moving through the forest, heading in her direction. "Hello," she called out hesitantly. her voice feeling small and fragile in the vast, silent woods. No answer. The rustling continued, now closer, just beyond her sight. Evelyn's hand instinctively went to the small knife she carried in her pack, her fingers wrapping tightly around its hilt. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, tall, slender, and cloaked in dark, weathered clothes. His face was hidden beneath the hood of his cloak, and though he moved with purpose, there was an air of uncertainty about him, like he didn't fully belong in the forest, yet had spent enough time here to know its ways. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice firmer now, though she couldn't quite hide the wariness in her tone. The figure paused, looking up toward her. His eyes, a deep, piercing green, locked onto hers, and for a moment, Evelyn felt a chill run through her. There was something strange about his gaze, as though he could see right through her, as though he knew more about her than she could understand. "Someone who knows this forest," the man replied, his voice low and steady. "And someone who knows that you shouldn't be here." Evelyn straightened, pushing her unease aside. "I'm looking for something important." The man didn't move for a long moment, his gaze flicking from her to the dark path ahead. "The forest isn't kind to those who seek its secrets." "I'm not afraid," Evelyn said, more to herself than to him. But as the words left her mouth, she realized they weren't entirely true. She wasn't afraid of the forest itself, but the mystery it held, and what it might hold about her parents. "Everyone says that," the man said with a half smile, but there was no humor in it, "until they find something they weren't prepared for." He took a step closer, lowering his hood slightly. His face was sharp, angular, with weathered features that spoke of many years spent in the wilderness. His dark hair fell in disarray around his face, and his green eyes glinted with a strange, almost otherworldly intensity. "Are you one of the guardians?" Evelyn asked, her pulse quickening. The stories she had heard from her grandmother were flooding back now, the legends of beings who protected the secrets of the forest, the door, and everything hidden within. The man's lips curled into a faint smirk. "Not exactly," he replied, "but I know where you're headed, and I know what you'll find." Evelyn stepped back, eyes narrowing. "You're not going to stop me?" He shrugged, his posture relaxed, but his gaze still intense. "I can't stop you. The forest chooses its own way. But don't say I didn't warn you. The door isn't a place for the unprepared." Evelyn's heart raced. The man's words didn't sit right with her, but there was something compelling about him, something that made her believe he knew more than he was letting on. He hadn't said much, but everything about him screamed that he was connected to the forest, that he understood it in ways no one else did. "Why are you warning me?" she asked. The man hesitated, his eyes flicking away as though wrestling with an inner conflict. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now. "Because I've seen what happens to people who seek the door, and not all of them come back." Evelyn's mind raced. "What do you mean?" But before she could ask any more questions, the man turned abruptly and began walking away, vanishing into the shadows of the trees. Evelyn was left standing there, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The path ahead was still unclear, but one thing was certain: she was no longer alone in her quest, and whatever lay ahead, she had to face it, no matter what the forest or the strange man had to say. She took a deep breath and continued on, the uncertainty hanging thick in the air. Chapter 3. Whispers of the forest. Evelyn stood still for a long moment, her mind racing. The man's warning echoed in her ears, mingling with the rustling of the trees and the distant calls of unseen creatures. She had expected to be alone in her quest, but now, with the encounter fresh in her mind, she wasn't sure anymore. Who was the man? And what did he mean by not all of them come back? Her heart beat faster. The door. That's what mattered now. The door was the key, the answer to everything that had haunted her thoughts for years. The mystery of her parents' disappearance, the strange map, the cryptic stories her grandmother used to whisper about the forest's power. They all led here, to the heart of the woods, to the door that might unlock the truth. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn pushed forward, her boots crunching against the underbrush. She couldn't turn back. Now, the forest, with all its whispers and secrets, would never let her go once she had stepped into its depths. She had to keep moving. The path ahead was narrower than before, the trees leaning in closer, their branches casting long, twisted shadows across her path. The once clear trail was now almost entirely obscured by thick vines and dense thorns, making each step more difficult than the last. The air had grown cooler, and a faint mist clung to the ground, swirling like something alive, as if the forest itself was trying to keep her from reaching her destination. Evelyn paused for a moment to catch her breath and survey the trail. The map, once so clear and simple, now seemed to mock her with its faded lines and indistinct symbols. It didn't offer much guidance beyond the basic path. The door was close. She could feel it in her bones. But how close? She couldn't tell. As she glanced down, something caught her eye. A flash of light, almost imperceptible, flickering through the mist. It wasn't sunlight. It was something else, something unnatural. A pulse of energy, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. Evelyn hesitated, then moved toward it, her senses alert. The flicker of light led her deeper into the mist, through the trees, until the forest seemed to open up before her. A clearing. In the center of the clearing stood the most bizarre sight Evelyn had ever seen. A stone archway, covered in thick ivy, standing alone in the middle of the forest. It looked ancient, weathered by time, yet it pulsed with an energy that sent a shiver down her spine. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this it? The door? But there was something off about it. The air around the archway seemed to shimmer, and a faint hum emanated from the stone. It was as if the archway itself were alive, breathing in sync with the forest. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of moss underfoot. The closer she got, the stronger the sensation of being watched grew. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Evelyn paused, feeling the weight of the presence in the air. Was this the door? Was she ready for this? The archway stretched higher than she had first thought. The stone was adorned with intricate carvings, symbols she recognized from her grandmother's stories. The shapes seemed to swirl, like they were shifting before her eyes, morphing into different forms as if they were alive, watching her. A sense of unease filled her as she stepped closer, but curiosity urged her onward. As she touched the stone, the hum intensified, vibrating through her fingertips and into her bones. She jerked her hand back, startled, but then the ground beneath her feet shifted, and a soft voice, distant yet clear, echoed from the stones. "Why do you seek the door?" Evelyn froze, her pulse quickening. The voice was not human. Yet it wasn't quite otherworldly either. It seemed to come from the very air around her, as if the forest itself had spoken. Her heart thudded in her chest, and she found herself instinctively replying, "I seek the truth about my parents, about the forest, about everything." The stone archway pulsed again, this time stronger, like a heartbeat, and the voice spoke once more, this time with more urgency. "The truth comes at a price, seeker. The door reveals all, but it does not give without taking." Evelyn took a step back. What did that mean? The door, the forest. What price would she have to pay for answers? She was about to ask, but the moment she moved, the hum stopped. The air grew still, unnervingly quiet. The forest felt empty. The fog seemed to pull away, as though retreating from her presence, and the eerie silence pressed in on her. The presence, the voice, everything seemed to disappear, as if it had never been there at all. Evelyn was left standing in the clearing, alone, with the archway still pulsing before her, waiting. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, but her determination overruled the fear. She reached out and touched the archway again. This time, there was no hum, no warning. The stone was cold, almost lifeless beneath her fingertips, and yet she felt the power of it, undeniable and consuming. The ground shifted once more. The forest trembled. The air grew dense and thick with anticipation, as though the forest itself were drawing a deep breath, preparing for something. Evelyn took another step forward, her breath catching in her throat as the stone archway seemed to expand before her eyes, like it was opening, slowly but inexorably. And then, with a soft creak, the stone parted, and the archway revealed a tunnel, a swirling vortex of light and shadow, leading into nothing and everything at once. Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what lay beyond the threshold, but she knew one thing: there was no turning back now. She stepped through. Chapter 4. Beyond the door, the world tilted. For a brief moment, Evelyn felt weightless, as though she was suspended between two realities. The air around her seemed to vibrate, swirling with energy, and the colors of the forest blurred into streaks of light and shadow. She closed her eyes instinctively, heart pounding as the tunnel of swirling light pulled her deeper, faster. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself standing in a place unlike anything she had ever seen. Gone were the towering trees, the familiar scent of moss and earth. In their place was a vast, ethereal landscape, bathed in a soft, otherworldly glow. The ground beneath her feet was smooth and silver, reflecting the light like liquid metal. The sky above was a swirling kaleidoscope of colors, blues, purples, and golds, shifting and merging in ways that defied nature. The air smelled faintly of flowers and something older, like the deep stillness of a forgotten dream. Evelyn took a tentative step forward, her boots making no sound on the strange surface. She felt as if she were walking through a world suspended in time, as though the very laws of reality were different here. The forest, the door, everything seemed like a distant memory now, fading away like a dream she couldn't fully grasp. And then she saw it. In the distance, perched atop a hill, stood an ancient structure, a towering citadel of stone, its jagged spires reaching toward the shifting sky like fingers of some forgotten god. The stones that made up the structure were etched with symbols similar to those on the map, the ones that had pulsed with energy before she crossed the threshold. A deep sense of recognition washed over her, though she couldn't explain why. She knew, somehow, that this place was significant, that the answers she had been searching for lay within. Without hesitation, Evelyn began walking toward the citadel, drawn by an invisible force. As she moved, the world around her seemed to respond, shifting, bending, reacting to her presence. The colors in the sky grew more vibrant, as if alive, swirling faster with each step she took. Suddenly, a voice, soft and melodic, echoed through the air. It was not a voice she could hear with her ears, but one that reverberated deep within her chest, as though it spoke directly to her soul. "Welcome, seeker." Evelyn stopped in her tracks, her heart thumping. She searched the air, but saw no one. The voice had no origin, and yet it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Who's there?" Evelyn called out, her voice shaking with both awe and fear. "What is this place?" The voice answered, calm and omnipresent, like a whisper on the wind. "This is the place between worlds, the crossing point of all things. You stand on the edge of what was, what is, and what will be. Here, all truths are revealed, if you are willing to see them." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but the words died on her lips. Instead, she felt a sudden compulsion to continue moving toward the citadel. It was as though the voice had already given her all the answers she needed, even if she didn't fully understand them yet. With a surge of determination, Evelyn pressed forward, her pace quickening as she neared the citadel. The ground shifted beneath her feet, and the air grew heavier, charged with an unseen energy that hummed through her veins. The gates of the citadel stood before her now, tall and imposing, carved from the same dark stone as the structure itself. The door was ajar, as if waiting for her. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping through, the door closing silently behind her. Inside, the air was thick with the weight of ancient knowledge. Massive stone pillars lined the hall, each one etched with the same swirling symbols she had seen earlier. The hall stretched endlessly before her, leading deeper into the heart of the citadel. And at the end of the hall, there it was, the source of everything, the heart of the mystery, a great golden door. Evelyn approached it, her breath shallow, her heart racing. There was no mistaking it now. This was the door, the one her grandmother had warned her about, the one that held the answers. But what kind of answers would she find? As she reached out to touch the door, the voice returned, softer this time, almost tender. "Are you prepared, seeker?" Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she rested it against the golden surface of the door. "I am ready," she whispered, even as doubt gnawed at her mind. Was she truly ready for what lay beyond? The door creaked open, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Beyond it was a chamber bathed in a warm, golden light. In the center of the room stood a large stone pedestal, upon which rested a small, intricately carved box. It was made of the same stone as the citadel, and it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the box. It was the same box her grandmother had kept hidden away for so many years. The one she had always told her about in hushed tones, the one that contained the truth. With trembling hands, Evelyn approached the pedestal and reached out to lift the box. As her fingers closed around it, a surge of energy shot through her, so powerful that it made her knees buckle. She steadied herself against the pedestal, her heart hammering in her chest. A vision flooded her mind. She saw her parents, her mother and father, standing in the forest, just beyond the very door she had crossed. They were older now, but still the same, and behind them stood the forest, dark and endless, its secrets stretching far beyond what she could see. Her parents turned to face her, their eyes filled with both sadness and pride. "Your journey was never just about the forest," her mother's voice whispered in the vision, though her lips didn't move. "It was about you, Evelyn. The door was always meant for you. It has always been part of your destiny." Suddenly, the vision faded, and Evelyn was back in the golden chamber, her hands still clutching the box. She took a deep breath, her mind reeling from what she had just witnessed. The door, the box, the visions, they were all part of something far greater than she could have ever imagined. She wasn't just a seeker of answers. She was a part of the forest, a part of its secret, and her parents had known this all along. But the question remained, what was she meant to do with this knowledge? And would she be able to survive the price the forest demanded for its secrets? The door closed behind her, and the forest, its mysteries, its dangers, waited for her return.